All right, the joy of civility.
February, the Regional Chamber Policy Conference. Shelby Scarborough kicks off the Detroit Civility Project.
What I'd like you to do is turn to the person to your left and to your right, and instead of saying, "Hi, how are you? My name is," I'd like you to turn to each other and say, "I come in peace."
Peace.
I come in peace.
I come in peace.
Nice
How you
to see
doing
you
today?
again.
Good to be seen.
We're talking about the ability
Trip was great.
on a one-to-one basis to be able to sit across a table from somebody who sees the world differently than you do and be able to have a conversation.
I started looking at this last night, and I might be impressed.
Madonna Van Fossen, white collar, North Oakland County. Tamuk Scruggs, blue collar, Detroiter. Oakland County Commissioners David Woodward, Democrat, and Mike Gingell, Republican. Margaret Allen, advocate for returning citizens, with Amy Hennis, Corporate Public Affairs Director. Their participants paired in a quest for civility, spending time in local coffee shops.
Stephen Henderson, I think his opinions are very much in line with mine. I've read in the past a lot of Nolan Finley stuff and been like, oh, that guy. That guy. And so when they sat down together and talked about the work they did to have a friendship, I'm like, how in the world?
It started on Detroit Public Television when Nolan had a show.
Welcome to Am I Right?
Town and I would fill in sometimes.
Every time the economy showed a glimmer of hope, he would beat it down with another tax, another restriction on
I guess
business.
that's where we would disagree. Roosevelt did not ruin the economy in the 30s, he saved it, but we gotta move on. And we kind of got to know each other outside that context in some social contexts and found that we had some things that we both liked, bourbon being one of them, and bourbon maybe being one of the most important.
You started to develop a little bourbon snobbery. People were starting to treat it like wine, you know.
Nolan's a Kentucky native. Stephen worked at a newspaper there.
I mean, there's a big sort of cultural context to bourbon in Kentucky that's important. It's what they make. If you spend any time there, you become hooked. Both of us have been made better in the work that we do by the relationship we've been able to build, which, you know, is tense at times. Sometimes it is uncivil. You see it on TV when we get after each other.
Ask Chrissy.
That's not the same
J.
thing.
Edgar Hoover
Nolan.
thought they were.
No, he didn't.
So
no,
hang
he
on,
didn't.
hang on, hang on.
You can't justify
And we can get after each other when we really disagree, but there isn't a personal animus that you take away from that conversation about that other person. It's still Nolan, and I'm still Stephen, even though we bitterly disagree sometimes about things.
Even in our profession, even among political commentators, if you will, and opinion journalists, there isn't that much interaction today. There's not that comfort level for people to have good, healthy debates and discussions. You look at the way our media has become bunkered on the cable news channels and on the internet. You have all conservative and you have all liberal, and they don't talk across the lines. They fight, and they call each other names, and they accuse each other of having all manner of bad intentions and motives. You're not seeing enough of these sort of conversations.
So what's the feedback that you've been getting since?
I've gotten a lot of really positive feedback. You know, people saying, wow, that's really impressive that the two of you are working on that together. I get a lot of negative feedback too from people on the left who feel like civility is a call for them not to stand up and, you know, push back against.
It's a call for action. That sometimes in a world that you have to be uncivil to be able to get your point across
Right.
in certain times.
We really want to have authentic conversations, but we really want to have brave conversations too.
Detroiter Lauren Hood does a lot of things. One is bringing people together to talk, really talk.
The term civility for me, it's triggering. It kind of sets a tone that says, we're not going to be authentic in here, we're going to be safe.
But yeah, we talked about this. It's cool. It's cool. So
Here, Hood leads a recent gathering called the Better Arguments Project. Although in sessions like these, there's not really supposed to be any arguing, and it's not just about being civil.
I'm really quick to point out that we're not talking about that kind of civility. We're not saying, you know, how do you protest a violation of your rights? How do you push back against inequality? What we're saying is, when you're dealing with another person in your community who just happens to think differently, come to different conclusions than you do, how do you have a conversation with that person about that difference without it being uncivil. I mean, I think that's a different level of responsibility that we all have to be able to make the community better.
So I used to get all the time, well, what's the point of like these conversations? They don't do anything. I'm like, no, I've seen it do something. I've seen it work. But everybody has to show up.
About 80 people have shown up for the Detroit Civility Project, pairing up to discuss differences and find things in common, not just once, but getting together again and again to counter the incivility that always seems to be in the news from Washington.
Little pencil neck Adam Schiff.
I don't just think it's President Trump. I think it's the environment has become toxic. Everyone has to be on the attack. And if you're not on the attack, you get eaten.
I think the better term for what we're doing is listening. It's more like a listening project.
If you learn to discuss, if you learn to converse, if you learn to have very intense discussions and passionate discussions without taking away hard feelings, you could surprise yourself because you're more open to talking with people who don't hold your same views. You may learn something, and I think that's the point.
All right, both of you, besides looking at how you looked 10 years ago and some of that video.
I could have done without that.
Scary, right?
No, but the fact that so many people have stepped up now and they are getting together and having these conversations, you're starting a little something here, Nolan.
Well, we're anxious to see when we get to Mackinac at the end of the month. We're really anxious to see and hear from the people, these 80 people who went through the exercise, and whether it was useful, what they learned about each other, whether they came to some sort of respect for the other person's, if not agreement, at least respect that they're not ill-intentioned, they're not evil, they just think differently.
And you really have to try it before you say, oh, it's never going to work.
Well,
you have to be
yeah,
able to put yourself there
Yeah.
to sit down and to do the work.
Yeah, and I think there are some measures as to whether it's working. One is whether you agree to talk again, right? You walk away and say, this is someone I can deal with. The other is it uncomfortable? It should be. It should be difficult to talk about these things and talk about them frankly, not to shy away from the more controversial things, but to be able to do it in a manner that doesn't insult the other person or denigrate them.
And I think the next step is, besides people who may never meet again in their line of work, get down to the Thanksgiving dinner table with your family, the people that you have to see and you have to interact with all the time that you maybe have some fundamental differences with. But I can't wait to see it all, and we're just going to continue to follow it, and we'll have more stories on the Civility Project when we get up to the Mackinac Policy Conference. So stick with DetroitPBS.org for more.